Tales of escaping prisoners of war during the Second World War have been popular ever since the war ended. They are, for the most part, tales of the underdog using sharp wits, unremitting courage, and a reliance on good fortune to overcome nearly impossible odds. Such stories include all theaters of the war, including the China-Burma-India theater depicted in The Bridge on the River Kwai, the Central Pacific Campaign in King Rat, Unbroken, and many others, and the European campaign in The Great Escape, Stalag 17, and more. Many, if not most, of these tales of escapes and harrowing pursuits have been based on true events. Others, fiction created in the mind of the author, have nevertheless relied on known techniques adopted by Allied military personnel in their persistent attempts to elude their captors and return to their own commands, often at significant risk to their lives. Both British intelligence and their American counterparts developed complex organizations created to provide escape assistance to captured servicemen. These services included maps printed on silk, which doesn't rustle audibly when folded, hidden within games or playing cards. Paper money was provided in a similar manner. Agents from Britain's Special Air Service and America's Office of Strategic Services helped establish safe houses, travel routes, havens in neutral ports, and other such aids to escapees. Still, even with all the assistance throughout the war, only about 1,200 of more than 170,000 Allied POWs successfully escaped their captors and returned to service, considerably less than 1%. The Germans were taken prisoner too. They attempted escapes too. Yet, their rate of success was even lower. Losers. The Western Allies seized over 4.5 million German POWs prior to the surrender in May 1945, holding them in camps in Britain, the United States, and in Canada. Of that number, throughout the entire war, only one, a Luftwaffe pilot and purported flying ace named Franz von Werra, managed to escape his captors, elude pursuit, and return to his duties in the German Air Force. His journey took him through Britain, across the Atlantic, across eastern Canada, into the United States, Central America, Spain, Italy, and finally Germany. He was the only one who got away. Here is how he did it. Welcome back to Biographics. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, and today's script was provided by Larry Holsworth. So be sure to show him some love in the comments as you deploy your likes, subscribe, and ring that bell, and share this video with someone who loves learning about historical figures. Let's get to it. The First World War had seen the emergence of a new, modern form of warrior up to then unknown. He was the fighter pilot, viewed as a lone wolf, with similarities, at least in the press of the day, to the Knights of the Chivalric Orders. Their mythology grew in the years between the wars, with tales of the Red Baron of Germany, the American volunteers of the Lafayette Escadrille, the British pilots who hosted and toasted their captured opponents before escorting them to their incarceration. When World War II began, some of the myths surrounding airmen, in particular fighter pilots, remained in place, and pilots of both the Allies and the Axis exploited them. Self-promotion was common. Pilots cultivated their image as individualists through flamboyant uniforms and behaviors. The German Luftwaffe was run by Hermann Göring, himself a World War I ace who favored self-promotion. He tolerated the attitudes of his pilots and enjoyed idolatrous treatment of his minions in the German press. He did not object to his pilots currying press attention, as long as such attention contributed to the legend of the German fighting man. One such pilot was a young lieutenant named Franz Freiherr von Werra. Freiherr was not a name, but a title roughly equivalent to Baron, which Franz inherited from his biological father, who abandoned him shortly after his birth in 1914. Such title would imply wealth, at the very least in the form of a landed estate, but in truth the elder von Werra was broke, and Franz was raised by necessity by relatives. Nor was he German by birth. Von Werra was born and raised in Switzerland and was of Swiss descent. He grew up displaying the special arrogance of one who believes himself better than his fellows by right of birth, but denied his birthright by unfair circumstances. In 1936, he joined the newly reconstituted German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. When World War II began, with the September 1939 German invasion of Poland, von Werra was serving as a lieutenant in Western Germany, in one of the few fighter groups left out of Poland in order to protect against French and British intervention in the West. His first combat experience came during the Battle of France in May 1940. He made several claims of destroying French and British aircraft over Flanders and in France, and with his rising number of kills, he courted the attention of the German press. Von Werra learned that during the First World War, pilots of the American Lafayette Escadrille had kept lion cubs, named Whiskey and Soda, as pets. He soon sported a pet lion of his own, which he introduced to the German military magazine Signal as his personal pet Simba. Far from the stoic, closed-mouthed military professional, von Werra boasted of his victories, expounding on his superior abilities as a pilot and marksman. His enemies in the Royal Air Force read Signal too, as well as monitored German communications and maintained an extensive spy network in Europe. Soon they had a steadily thickening file on Lieutenant von Werra, one in which all too frequently the Germans' tales of victories in the air did not match their own record of aircraft losses. After the collapse of France, the fighting shifted to the skies over Great Britain during the summer of 1940. During the Battle of Britain, von Werra claimed to have destroyed 9 British aircraft in a single sortie, which took place on August 25, 1940. Von Werra claimed to have shot down a British Spitfire and 3 Hawker Hurricanes in air-to-air combat, after which he destroyed another 5 Hurricanes on the ground before withdrawing. Von Werra shared the story of his triumph with German magazines, and the stories included pictures of the young pilot happily romping with his pet lion. 10 days later, von Werra was shot down over Kent in Britain and taken prisoner. You want to know what's worse than finding out you let a prisoner of war escape? Discovering how much of my personal information was with data brokers. And with today's sponsor, Delete Me, I found out that 18 of these companies had my personal information. Data brokers are companies that snatch up your personal info and sell or rent that information for a nominal price. And it's not just social media websites. They get this information from all over the internet, including government public records. Now, I'm pretty careful when it comes to what I do and don't do online, but you know something? You can never be too careful. This information included my name, age, past addresses, family members, marital status, and my wife's name as well. And with Delete Me, I was able to get it removed from these websites. Now, full disclosure, you can absolutely do this on your own. Every one of these data brokers has an opt-out process that you can follow. But if you're like me and you don't have the several hours it would likely take to follow that process, for every website that has your information, Delete Me will help keep your data more secure by doing all of that for you. All you have to do is sign up, follow the instructions in the welcome email, and tell them what information you'd like to be removed. So if you want to have a little more peace of mind when it comes to your private data, you can get 20% off Delete Me US consumer plans when you go to joindeleteme.com/biographics and use promo code biographics at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/biographics, code biographics. Franz von Werra was uninjured in the attack on his aircraft on September 5, 1940, which resulted in his capture by the British. Credit for shooting him down has never been officially assigned, and at least 4 RAF pilots claimed responsibility. He landed the more or less intact Messerschmitt Bf-109 and was captured by the cook of a local Home Guard unit, armed with a meat cleaver. The German was held briefly at the nearby Maidstone Barracks before being transferred to Trent Park, where the British maintained an interrogation facility for newly arrived prisoners. There, the prisoners were housed in rooms containing 1 or 2 men, dined communally in deference to rank, and were granted outside recreational activities. Von Werra remained at Trent Park for about 3 weeks. The purpose of interrogation at Trent Park went far beyond the military strength and disposition of the enemy. British interrogators attempted to garner information regarding German civilian morale, the impact of rationing, the treatment of German occupying troops by the defeated French, and other information regarding daily life in occupied Europe. British Special Operations Executive, or SOE, interrogators interviewed von Werra from September 16th through 19th, 1940 at Trent Park. Their report includes one of the few descriptions of the young pilot beyond his own. They are unflinching, with the report noting that this young man is a completely successful product of Nazi education. The report noted without comment that von Werra claimed to have met with Hitler several times, despite such a meeting between the Führer and a mere lieutenant being unusual. Von Werra also informed his British interrogators that he had visited several concentration camps, as to do so was a privilege extended to any officer of the German military. He spoke of his approval of the beating of prisoners who were, by definition, enemies of the state. The SOE report reveals von Werra as a committed, dedicated Nazi, with a cult-like worship of Adolf Hitler and a complete confidence that Germany would win the war, and in doing so bring about the end of the British Empire. The SOE report also reveals that British officers confronted von Werra with the numerous discrepancies over his claimed aerial victories and official British records of losses, which the prisoner simply shrugged off. Finally, having decided there was little more to learn from this particular Nazi, von Werra was assigned to a prisoner of war camp in Lancashire, at Grisdale Hall, designated by the British as Prisoner of War Camp No. 1. At Grisdale, German officer prisoners were held in relative comfort, occupying rooms in an old English country house. They were exempt under the Geneva Convention from work duties and were provided with opportunities to explore professional education, entertainment, gardening, physical fitness, and other recreational activities. A stark difference from the realities of concentration camps in Germany. Eventually, the prisoners were moved into huts built for the purpose of housing 10 prisoners apiece, after which the old country house contained administrative offices, classrooms, medical facilities, and other infrastructure. For von Werra, Grisdale offered the opportunity to escape, though getting away from the camp was just a small part of his problem. Getting away from the island, which is Britain, was another challenge altogether. He made his first escape from Grisdale on October 7, 1940, running away from a group of prisoners on an exercise walk outside of the camp by scaling a stone wall which ran along the road and using its height to cover his fleeing across a field. Other prisoners helped cover his absence. On October 10th, long after dark, he was discovered by 2 home guards, hiding in a small stone hut used to store sheep fodder, which liberally dotted the fields in the region. He escaped the guards by extinguishing their lantern, after which he again fled under the cover of darkness. 2 days later, he was spotted by local farmers who reported his presence to the authorities. He was found nearly submerged in a mud bog, exhausted, hungry, and dehydrated. After serving 21 days of solitary confinement as punishment, he was transferred to POW Camp 13, centered upon Swanwick Hall in Derbyshire. There, von Werra joined a group of German officers who called themselves the Swanwick Tiefbau AG, German for Swanwick Excavations Limited, though Tiefbau literally translates to teeth out in English. During his first escape attempt, von Werra had little idea of what he wanted to do other than possibly reach a coastal port where he could somehow contact a ship from a neutral nation in which he could seek sanctuary. His next attempt, which would be via a tunnel excavated by his compatriots, he planned to reach a nearby RAF base and steal an airplane which he would then fly to the continent. The plan was not as far-fetched as it may seem. In 1940, the RAF contained hundreds of foreign pilots, hastily assigned to units at random to offset the rising casualties of the Battle of Britain. Polish, Czech, French, Belgian, Dutch, and other foreign pilots served in the Royal Air Force. Von Werra planned to pose as a Dutch pilot serving with a special experimental bombing unit. Other prisoners in Camp 13 supported the escape by modifying clothing, forging documents, and obtaining money. On December 20th, 1940, von Werra and 4 companions escaped via the tunnel they had dug and separated, each seeking his own way. All but von Werra were quickly recaptured. Despite the area being warned of his presence and a corresponding high state of alert, he managed to reach RAF Hucknall, where he was sitting in the cockpit of a fueled Hurricane, familiarizing himself with the controls when he was recaptured at pistol point. He was then returned to Camp 13. By then, the British authorities had decided to send the troublesome Nazi to Canada, where escaping back to Europe was seemingly impossible. In January 1941, von Werra was part of a shipment of prisoners to Canada, sent by convoy to Halifax, and shipped westward by train to the new camps being erected in the west. Von Werra was destined to a camp on the north shore of Lake Superior, an area as remote and rugged as any in the world. Von Werra departed the European Theater of Operations on January 10, 1941, embarking aboard the former liner Duchess of York at Greenock, Scotland. In Canada, von Werra learned of his destination, on the shores of a lake which shared its borders with the then-neutral United States. The climate in Canada in January is not exactly balmy, and von Werra had little knowledge of the actual distances involved. Yet he was determined to escape from the train which conveyed him and his fellow prisoners to the west from Montreal. On January 21st, von Werra escaped from the train by jumping out of a window which his captors believed to be locked and sealed. After his escape, his fellow prisoners again covered his absence for the first 24 hours, giving him a full day's head start. Nonetheless, von Werra found himself in heavy spruce woods, in frigid temperatures and deep snow, with his only means of conveyance being his own feet. After reaching what appeared to be a snow and ice-covered highway, and with no knowledge of the lay of the land around him, he decided to follow it until it led to some sort of shelter. A passing truck gave him a ride, and he found himself in Smiths Falls, Ontario. From Smiths Falls, the American community of Ogdensburg, New York, was about 73 kilometers to the south-southeast, about 45 miles. The last mile of the journey, which was through some of the most rugged territory in North America, was across the St. Lawrence River, a treacherous crossing under ideal conditions. It was then almost completely frozen over, though the swift current ensured sections near midstream where the ice could rapidly become too thin to support a man's weight. In von Werra's own version of events, which he later related to American authorities, he went overland to the Canadian bank of the St. Lawrence, stole a boat he found stored nearby, and hauled it across the ice until he reached a flowing stream near the middle of the river. There, he floated the boat, collapsed into it in exhaustion, and remained in the boat until he felt it stop moving. When he roused himself, he found his boat stopped by an ice dam on the opposite side from which he had entered the water. He emerged from the boat onto the ice, enduring a good ducking in the frigid water for his pains. The air temperature that night was well below freezing. He then managed to cross the ice and stumbled onto the industrial site outside Ogdensburg, where he collapsed after learning from a security guard that he was in the United States. Revived, he confessed to the Ogdensburg police that he was an escaped German prisoner of war. He soon learned that he was in fact a prisoner of American bureaucracy. The police turned him over to the FBI as a possible saboteur. The FBI in turn sent him to Customs and Immigration, who decided he was an illegal immigrant. And guess what? He got due process. There was an immediate debate as to where von Werra belonged. Should he be returned to Germany, of which he was a citizen, or to Canada, from whose jurisdiction he had fled when he entered the United States? Canada and British diplomats lobbied strongly to return von Werra to their custody. Meanwhile, the German consulate in New York, using American immigration law to its advantage, argued that von Werra had not committed any crime other than seeking asylum, and thus was eligible for release on bond while his case was adjudicated. While these legal maneuverings were underway, the U.S. newspapers faithfully reported the presence of the escaped German fighter ace in the United States, as well as descriptions of his adventures during his escape. At the time, a large and vocal pro-German entity complicated American political scenes. Groups such as the German-American Bund and the America First movement argued against American support of Britain in the form of Lend-Lease and other pro-British activities. And German-language newspapers in several American cities supported Hitler's New Germany. To avoid inflaming further the anti-British sentiment then prevalent in much of the United States, the Roosevelt administration maintained the appearance of strict neutrality in the case of Franz von Werra, awaiting the decision of the courts in compliance with existing law. Thus, while Canadian and American authorities discussed von Werra's legal status, the U.S. government looked the other way when German diplomats moved von Werra to Mexico in February 1941. Once it was clear there would be little in the way of protest, von Werra was moved from there to Brazil and then to Spain. Once in Spain, he was entered into Vatican rat lines, clandestine paths outside of normal diplomatic channels. The Vatican moved him to Rome, where he was turned over to Mussolini's secret police. From there, his return to Germany was ensured, and he arrived in Berlin on April 18, 1941, in time to help celebrate Adolf Hitler's 51st birthday. April 1941 was a heady time for the Nazi Party and the German military machine. The German army had overrun Europe. Its air forces, though still engaged in a bloody stalemate over Great Britain, had elsewhere swept the skies of enemy airplanes. Its U-boats were wreaking havoc in the Atlantic. Hitler's mythical Superman appeared to be real to his true believers, and von Werra represented him compellingly. Established tales of his adventures preceded his arrival in Germany. He was feted, welcomed personally by Hermann Goering, and awarded the Knight's Cross. The German Luftwaffe recognized his claims of 9 destroyed British planes prior to his being shot down, making him officially an ace fighter pilot. British records did not support any of von Werra's claims for kills in Britain, and modern scholarship indicates they were false, though most tales of von Werra credit him as an ace. German intelligence debriefed him thoroughly over British interrogation techniques, prisoner treatment, and any other information he had picked up on his travels. For a time, he was tasked with briefing German pilots over what to expect when captured by the British. In June, Hitler dispatched his Supermen eastwards, into the Soviet Union. Von Werra went eastward as well, promoted to captain and assuming command of a fighter wing stationed in Poland in July 1941. Von Werra was only in combat on the Eastern Front for 1 month in July 1941, though during that time he claimed to have destroyed 13 Soviet airplanes in air-to-air combat, raising his overall total to 21 in the air and an additional 5 destroyed on the ground. As with his claims of victories in France and over Britain, few were witnessed and several were unconfirmed, even after records were examined after the war. As with most tales of his exploits, embellishments, some by himself and some by later admirers, have obscured the record. The British, American, and French Air Forces required 5 confirmed aerial kills for a pilot to earn the designation of an ace. The German Air Force, beginning in World War I and continuing in the Second World War, required 10 kills for an ace. Based on the requirements of his own service, von Werra may not have been an ace at all. Only 4 of his claims of victories, those in France, were ever confirmed. In August 1941, von Werra's unit was withdrawn from frontline combat and sent to Mannheim in Germany to re-equip with a newer version of the Bf-109 fighter. After becoming acquainted with the new aircraft and with the replacement pilots who joined the squadron there, it was assigned to patrol duty on the Western Front, operating out of airfields in Holland. There, the squadron patrolled Dutch airspace, intercepting British aircraft and monitoring activity along the coast. Throughout his flying career, von Werra was known as a pilot who took often unnecessary risks, such as flying under bridges, pushing his aircraft beyond its design limits in areas such as dive speeds, rates of climb, and other high-risk maneuvers. To his admirers, he was pushing the envelope. To his detractors, he was showing off. On October 25th, von Werra took off on a routine patrol over the sea near Katwijk, Netherlands. During the flight, his aircraft, a new Messerschmitt Bf-109, simply dove straight into the sea. Von Werra's body was never recovered. The German propaganda ministry announced his death after several weeks had transpired, not wanting to admit the possibility that an Aryan Superman had committed a pilot error. They attributed the crash to engine failure. In 1957, Franz von Werra's story as a prisoner of war was dramatized in the British motion picture The One That Got Away, starring German actor Hardy Kruger as the by then largely forgotten German pilot. The film found its greatest success in terms of box office receipts in what was then West Germany, where von Werra's story had faded from memory. He is today remembered chiefly as the only German prisoner of war to escape custody and successfully return to Germany during the war. He is seldom noted as an unrepentant Nazi, though his British interrogators clearly identified him as one. Instead, he's depicted as a stereotypical professional soldier, dedicated to his homeland and his duty, rather than to his Führer and his philosophy, or rather lack thereof. His escape from a Canadian prison train in the dead of winter and his journey across the frozen St. Lawrence River was a remarkable achievement, worthy of legend. Unfortunately, the rest of this Nazi's short life was considerably less than legendary. And thanks again to Delete Me for sponsoring this video. Remember to follow the link in the description and pinned comment to get 20% off your subscription. It's a small price to pay to help keep your private data safe from bad actors. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment a historical figure we haven't covered yet, subscribe and ring that bell, and share this video with someone who enjoys learning about historical figures. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll see you next time.